Good evening, everyone. Nice to see you all again.
Evening.
Things are actually starting to get a bit more normal. I actually have 2 shaves this week, so things must be looking up. The other night I went and visited our membership officer, Glenn Lyons, who's doing a fantastic job. I had the pleasure of signing 7 affiliation certificates, and he's got 7 more clubs lined up for July. So even in lockdown, 41 is still moving on. And it's due to nights like this. This Connects has been absolutely fantastic tool for us to connect with members throughout the lockdown period. Well, the last 12 months, in fact. So 41 is actually on the move. Without further ado, I'll now hand over to Don, our comms man, who will give you an update of forthcoming events. Thanks, Don.
Thank you very much, Peter. Good evening to everyone. Our next speaker next week is from Scotland again, and he's talking about the Polo Academy, which is a special organisation that takes youngsters over to Greenland and teaches them how to go exploring in the Arctic Circle. The following week, we've got Andrew Johnson, who's a fellow 41er all the way from Calpe 41 Club, and he's going to be speaking on the use of English words divided by a common language. He's a very good speaker. He normally does a cruise circuit, so that should be a very good evening. So now, without further ado, I'm going to hand over to National Vice President Jim Conway to introduce the star of this evening, John McGovern. Over to you, Jim.
Thank you, Don. I like the way you're wearing your scout badge today, as though you're a football scout. I think that's very clever. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome you tonight, John. As an 18-year-old, I saw you lift the European Cup twice, but that's not where the story begins. It's 1965, as a 15-year-old, you made your debut for Hartlepool United. You were signed by Brian Clough for Derby, where you got promotion, First Division Championship. You then went to Leeds under the very, very, should we say, interesting time in their history. And then before, you know, sort of like perhaps the glory days, the real glory days of European club nights in Madrid and also Munich. You won the European Cup twice. You've won the championship as well with Nottingham Forest, and then went as a player manager to Bolton, and you then went down another route of managing Chorley, Rotherham United, Woking and Ilkeston Town. So welcome to you tonight. I'd just like to start off, we're doing a little bit of a question answer, which is going to really tell John's story, and then following on from that, if there's any questions that anybody wants to put into the chat, please do so. I'll try and pick them up and ask John those questions at the end. But first of all, would you like to tell us a little bit about your upbringing and being signed by Brian Clough and Peter Taylor for Hartlepool United in 1965 and making your debut as a 15-year-old?
Yeah, that's fine. I obviously born in Montrose. My family moved down to Hartlepool, strangely enough, to find work in those days because there was very little in Montrose. My father was just a labourer. So we moved down as a family to Hartlepool when I was 7 years of age. My father then went to work in Africa, believe it or not, in Ghana. And unfortunately, he was killed in an accident the day he was coming home when I was 11 years of age. So a little bit of a shock at the time. But eventually the school I went to was a grammar school. I didn't play football at all. I captained the cricket team for 3 years, captained the rugby team for 3 years in Hartlepool, and I wanted to be a tennis player at the time. But eventually, because I spent most of my holidays at my grandmother's in a place called Bowness near Edinburgh, I mixed in with a group of lads that did play football and no cricket or rugby. So I took up the game of football when I was more or less about sort of 14. And then, as you mentioned, at 15, I joined a junior team in Hartlepool called Central Park. We played in the Church League Division 3. And funny enough, in my first season there as a player, we won the cup and were runners up in the league. So I started off even at a junior level with a little bit of success. But then, obviously, my big break came when Brian Clough and Peter Taylor joined Hartlepool's United, as they were called in those days, as a management duo, and they insisted upon getting the youth team back on song, because at the time Hartlepool didn't have a youth team because they couldn't afford the extra coaches to help run it. And I went down for a trial match and obviously caught the eye of Peter Taylor and Brian Clough. In fact, there was a comment in the local paper that after Peter Taylor had seen me, he said, I turned to Brian and said, lock the doors of the ground and don't open them till we've signed that skinny kid playing it outside right, who ended up being me. But so I met them for the first time, and then was invited to train on Tuesdays and Thursday nights with the reserves and other hopefuls, with a view to trying to get into the first team. And I'll always remember my first night when I met Brian Clough, because, you know, the trainer got us to stand in a line, said, you know, I'm going to introduce you to the new manager and his assistant who've come along this evening to say hello to you. So now in those days, this is the 1960s, you know, the days of the Rolling Stones and the Beatles had started to come out. And I grew my hair to about shoulder length, which was a bit brave in those days. And I can always remember that when the trainer said, stand in line, boys, you're going to meet the new manager. The manager went along the line, shook hands with the boys saying, good luck, son, good luck, son. And then came to me at the end of the line, took one look at my shoulder length hair and said, stand up straight, get your shoulders back and get your hair cut. You look like a girl. And I can remember going home that night and my mum said, how did training go, son? And I said, I ain't going back there, mum. The bogeyman's arrived. But I did pluck up courage and I did go back. And obviously at the age of 16, I made my league debut, which wasn't bad after 1 year in junior football. But it was always interesting with Clough and Taylor, especially in the dressing room before you went out for a match. I mean, you know, Clough was, well, I'll say inspirational. If I just give you an example of before one match, you know, he stood there and there's 5 minutes to go of the bell, and he'd been arguing with Peter Taylor previously for about half an hour in front of the players, and the argument had started because the trainer, or the sponge man as he was called in those days, Tommy was ill with the flu and couldn't attend the match. And Brian Clough saying to Peter Taylor, well, you'll have to take the sponge out today, Peter. Tommy's got the flu. But Peter Taylor was a strong character, and he said, look, I'm not doing it. It's not my job. But Clough was insistent and said, no, you'll have to take the sponge out today, Peter. So anyway, the bell went 5 minutes before kickoff. The argument finished, and just before we went onto the field of play, Brian conducted one of his legendary technical coaching sessions with the players. Goes up to the goalkeeper. You're a goalie. Catch the ball when it comes in our penalty area. You're a centre forward. Get a shot on target. McGovern, you're a midfield player. Do what you can. So with this inspiration in our minds, we went out there and obviously performed on the football field. But strangely enough, a player went down injured about 15 yards inside the touchline. And of course, the referee blew his whistle. Trainer. And there's no reaction from the dugout. And then the referee is a bit more concerned, you know, trainer, and he's blowing his whistle and getting really agitated. And then, you know, it got to the point where the referee is marching over towards the dugout where there's still been no reaction from Peter Taylor or Brian Clough. And all of a sudden the sponge came flying out the dugout and landed about a yard away from the injured player, who picked it up and squeezed the water on his ankle with a sponge and threw it back at the dugout in total disgust. And I can remember coming off at the end of the match, because I'm going past Clough and Taylor, and Peter Taylor's going, I told you I wasn't doing it. I told you I wasn't going to do it. It's the only game I played in a 17-year career where the trainer never came out onto the field of play. So all very strange, but as I said, Clough and Taylor were, you know, quite unique in the way that they handle players. And at Hartlepool, I just, you know, was delighted to be in the side. And the first lesson that Clough actually did teach me, because, you know, I mean, I'm 1 year out of junior football, so I'm a little bit of a novice. So we played one game where I tried to beat the fullback and failed, and then I tried to beat the fullback and failed again. So we came in for the training session on the Monday morning, and of course Clough just politely said to me, McGovern, get a ball and bring it here now. So I got a football and I went over to him. I said, well, what do you want me to do with it, boss? what I would like you to do is dribble that ball round the corner flag and back as fast as you can. So off I went with the ball at my feet, words of encouragement ringing in my ears. And my grandmother runs faster than you, McGovern. So I came back to him with the ball and said, was that okay, boss? And then he said, now I'd like you to run round the corner flag and back without the ball. So I ran round the corner flag, came back to him and said, was that okay, boss? And he said, now tell me what was easier, running with the ball or without the ball? And of course I said, without the ball, boss, why is that? He said, well, why don't you try bloody passing it on a Saturday then? Which was a lesson that I learnt, and it was a very, very good one, because the easiest way to play football is obviously pass it to someone and then run off the ball. But it stuck with me for some strange reason, obviously with the tone of Clough's voice helping me retain that memory. And I started to learn the game of football at Hartlepool United.
So as a 15-year-old, playing in the 4th division, how tough was it?
Well, I think you always remember your debut, because I lined up there on my debut. It was at home. It was the last match of the season. It was in May. And the opposition fullback came up to me, and said, he said, debut, son, is it? And I said, yes, it is. He said, oh, well, good luck to you. And I thought, what a nice lad that is. The fullback saying that to me before the kickoff, I didn't know him from Adam. And then just before we actually kicked off and started playing, he came up to me again and said, by the way, he said, if you go past me today, I'll break your fucking leg. Which was a very, very short, sharp reminder that I'm playing as a professional footballer now and not just for the fun of it. So a very harsh lesson in some ways, but obviously at 16 years of age, I thrived on playing football and loved every single game.
Brilliant. So then in 1968, you signed for 2nd Division Derby County. Again, Brian Clough and Peter Taylor were there. You were part of a team build that would lead to winning the 1st Division Championship. Do you want to talk us through that period?
Yeah, obviously when Clough left to go and manage at Derby, I thought, well, he might take me with him. But strangely enough, I didn't hear from him for about a year. And then typical, I didn't get a phone call. Somebody came around to my house and passed me a message, saying that, that Clough obviously wanted to sign me, but I had to go and put a transfer request in, which didn't please the manager at Hartlepool of the time, me putting a transfer request to leave, because we had actually won promotion with the team that Clough and Taylor had left at Hartlepool. So, I'd won promotion, but then Clough wants me down at Derby. So, I couldn't wait to join him there. And eventually he made a massive offer of £6,500, which was, I think, quite readily accepted by Hartlepool. So off I went down to negotiate a contract. Although negotiating contracts with Clough and Taylor didn't last too long either. That's your contract, get it signed. So I joined Derby County. I never got a rise. And obviously for the first 2 months there, I actually played in the reserves. Never got into the first team. We've got players like Dave Mackay, Willie Carlin, Roy McFarlane, some superb players. So I had to bide my time and get in the side. Now, at this time, I'm playing as an outside right. And in one reserve match, I came in after the reserve match on a Saturday, and Peter Taylor called me into his office and said, look, I've had a bad report about you in the match on Saturday for the reserves. And I said, well, what is the bad report? I think I'm entitled to know that. And he said, well, you never got a kick the whole game. And I said to him, well, no, I never got a kick. I said, because nobody could get the ball to me. I've been told to stay outside right, out there on the touchline, and they'll get the ball to me. I said, but they never did. So at his suggestion, I moved to play in central midfield and really thrived in that area where I had to kind of learn to tackle, because obviously outside rights in those days didn't do much tackling. But with the likes of Dave Mackay in Derby County side, I had someone to ask the advice of. So I'm on the training ground with Dave Mackay. I said, look, Dave, I said, can you teach me how to tackle? Because, I want to stay in the side and I want to become a better player. And Dave just said, it's quite simple, John. He said, when I tackle, he said, I like to go in low and I like to go in hard. And I said, well, that's fine, Dave, but what if you actually missed the ball? He said, I'll punch him in the bollocks. now you get a ball, bring it over here, and I'll show you how it works. And I went, no, it's all right, thank Dave. I think I'll figure this one out for myself. So Dave has actually taught me a little bit about the art of tackling after that, so which I became slightly better at. But obviously then I'm in the side playing central midfield, and it's a position I held obviously there for a few years. You know, and playing on the old baseball ground as it was in those days, the surface was something not to believe, because, you know, it was like a quagmire, a swamp half the time if there was too much rain, because all the drains were broken, and, you know, they never had either the finance or the time to put the drains right. So, and I can always remember that, you know, Clough had to be very persuasive at times with referees regarding actually playing a fixture. There was one in particular when we were playing Arsenal at the baseball ground, and you know, Clough typical told the groundsman on a Friday afternoon, flood the pitch, we play well on a wet surface, and if you haven't got enough water, get the fire brigade in. So the groundsman did as he's told, brings the fire brigade in, he floods the pitch, all nice. The problem was on the Saturday morning, there's a downpour for 2 hours before kickoff, and there's more than just a drop of water on the pitch by then. You could almost swim on it. And then I can always remember, because I'm stood waiting for the referee to inspect the pitch, thinking that we can't play this. There's puddles of water all over the whole pitch. And Charlie George, one of their star players, comes down, you know, and he's wearing a really smart Arsenal suit, club suit. And he didn't have any socks on, and I thought this must be a new fashion, but, you know, I'm not into that. But he tried to walk out on the old baseball ground pitch, took one step, and of course he put one foot down, and the water and the mud just came straight up and inside his shoes. And he turned to me, he said he called it a bleeding pitch. I said, listen, Charlie, it's not easy to walk on. Wait till you try and play on it, pal. And we did win 5-0 that day, because the other Arsenal players didn't know how to cope with the tactics either. But the funniest part was the referee, because the referee's gone out, and, you know, he's looking at a swamp, and he's got a ball in his hand, which, you know, he tries to bounce the ball to test the surface. And of course the ball just goes plop, sticks there in the mud. And as he's coming up with the ball in his hands, he's going, well, Brian, there's no way that we can play this game today, you know. And Clough just put his arm around him and went, it's absolutely perfect, pal. And everybody in earshot's going, perfect. It's like a swamp. And then Clough brings the politics into it. You don't want to rob the working man of his wages. They've turned up and they've opened the turnstiles. You'll be robbing the working man of his wages. You don't want that on your CV. You know, so the referee's like struggling, he doesn't know what to do. So eventually played the game, but we won 5-0. So, you know, we were all delighted with that. And strangely enough, that tactic we used to use on quite a number of teams. And a few years later, when we were playing against Benfica, obviously we played against them and beat them in the European Cup. But I met Eusebio, the great Portuguese player, a few years after that, and he reminded me of when they came to Derby. He said, "Beautiful sunshine." He said, "Lovely weather," and he said, "We went to look at the pitch." He said, "We didn't think that was the pitch we'd be playing on when they showed him it, because there was pools of water all over that one as well." So, and he told me that Bill Nicholson, the Tottenham Hotspur manager, had pulled the same trick on them the year before. So it was a good plan, you know, flood the pitch, because you're playing at home and you're more accustomed to it than the opposition. So at Derby, I'd made my way in the first team, learned some good lessons. And obviously my wage packet was rising magnificently, because by the time we were vying for the First Division Championship, I was on £25 a week, you know. So I was a bit of a flash lad in those days, you know, 25 quid a week. Wow, what a star. So as I said, I had a very interesting time at Derby, and the inevitable happened, though. You know, Clough's been so successful, bringing players to the club and being successful by winning the league, and eventually, because of his, I suppose, his ego in some ways, he has an argument with the chairman, resigns, and he leaves the club. The players are actually going to go on strike. And after some discussions with the PFA about the players actually just walking out and going on strike, we found out that we shouldn't really do that, you know, because you're breaking contracts. and there must be another way of resolving the situation. But of course, you know, Clough never got back to be the manager at Derby, and eventually he took over at Leeds United. Now everyone knows that, you know, his reign at Leeds United lasted 44 days. But he'd signed John O'Hare and myself from Derby County to join him at Leeds United, and unfortunately we were there a little bit longer than that. It's the only club I've ever played at where the players you're playing with are selling you hospital balls, and when you're passing to them, they're slowing down to make it look as if it's a bad ball. Very strange circumstances, and it was very, very tough. And I can remember the last game I actually played. Only played 4 games. I think you mentioned it earlier for the first team. And the last game I played, I mean, when I went out to play for the first team at Elland Road, the fans booed me before I'd even kicked the ball. Obviously, just trying to get back at the manager, who the fans hated as well as the players. And it was very, very difficult. And the last match that I appeared at Elland Road, I was booed constantly throughout the whole match. Players are selling me hospital balls, as I said, trying to make me look as if I'm a bad player, which I knew I wasn't. And when I saw my good lady Anne at the end of the match, she just wanted to get out of Elland Road as quickly as possible. And I said, no, we're not going yet. And she said, what do you mean? She said, you've been booed from the start of the match to the end of the match. She said, I want to go home. I don't want to come back here at all, you know. And I said, no, we're going in the supporters bar. And she looked at me incredulously and said, you must be joking. I said, right, you wait in the car. I said, I'm going in the supporters bar to have a drink, which I would normally do, and they're not beating me. So she ended up saying, I'm not sitting in the car on my own. She said, they might put bricks through the window or something. So I walked into the supporters bar, and half the supporters are throwing beer mats at me. But I've got Anne by the hand, and we get up to the bar, and the barman looked at me a little bit, again, quite amazed, and looked as if he didn't really want to serve me. And I said, excuse me, but I'd like a half a draft Guinness, please. And he kind of looked over his shoulder as if, you know, looking for support from somebody else to stop serving me. But he actually pulled me a half a Guinness. And as he pushed it over to me, he said, this one's on me. So I drank the half a Guinness very slowly. And when I'd finished it, I walked out. Again, people booing me as I'm going out there. And my good lady giving me the biggest rollicking I've ever had in my life. You know, don't you ever do that to me again, she said. Don't you ever do that to me again. And I said, look, if we just slunk out of the ground, I said, they'd have won. I said, the way I've done it, they know they ain't going to beat me. And obviously, after so long, Brian Clough made an offer from Nottingham Forest, whom he joined. By this time, I'd been tapped up on the phone not to go anywhere else, because Leeds had offers from Norwich City, where John Mond was the manager, and Carlisle, where Alan Ashman was the manager. And they'd both wanted to sign me, but I got a phone call saying, don't sign for them yet. And eventually Clough made an offer, and it was accepted. So it was off down to negotiate contract with Brian, which is, I've mentioned to you earlier, it didn't last too long with me, you know. And I can remember Anne, my good lady, saying, look, don't take a drop in wages. She said, you won the league at Derby County. So you got the semi-final of the European Cup. You're not a young player now. She said, you're an experienced player. So don't take a drop in wages. So I went down and met Brian. The negotiations over my contract this time lasted about 25 minutes. I took a 30 quid drop in wages and got the biggest rollicking I've ever had from my other half when I got back home. But I really and honestly can tell you, you know, the money side didn't bother me. I just wanted to play football, and obviously that was the start of something that people in Nottingham were never ever going to believe when Clough took over. And the rapidity of him bringing success to the club was somewhat phenomenal. Obviously with Peter Taylor's help, because he was a massive influence on Clough.
Just want to take, you mentioned about going to the semi-finals with Derby, and you know you didn't want to take a pay cut. It was quite a contentious match, that semi-final against Juventus, where Brian Clough, you know, was saying about how the officials were being bribed, and there was a big media fallout at the time. Can you give us a little bit of an insight into that?
Well, it's probably the only match I've ever had in football where I nearly cried coming off at the end of it, because I couldn't believe that you could be cheated or treated like that on a televised match in front of, you know, European officials. But the match started in Juventus, and the first two players that were booked, I think, were Archie Gemmill and Roy McFarland, who were carrying yellow cards from the previous round. So, you know, that meant they were going to miss the return leg in Derby. And then we got kicked off the pitch. Juventus won 3-1, and the referee gave them everything, and I mean everything. If they actually showed the match now, it would be an embarrassment to UEFA and the officials of any country. And I know that, you know, at the end of the match, obviously Brian's been asked to go into the press room to give his report, you know, and he said, "I'm not talking to any cheating, lying Italian bastards." And that's how he didn't appear on television, because he wouldn't even go to the press conference, which he was entitled to do. And then, of course, we lost the match 3-1. At the end of the match, I mean, I've got my head down. Everybody's got our heads down for the match in Turin. And as we're coming, you know, off the field, Helmut Haller, who was a German international player who played for Juventus, had his arm around the referee going into the referee's room. You know, you think he might have done it another way, you know, and not make it look so obvious. So we knew that the replay, we've still got a replay, the second leg at the baseball ground. And unfortunately, in the second half, Alan Hinton, our star winger, missed a penalty, which would have made the score obviously 3-2, and then we'd have only needed one more goal. And if we'd have got one more goal and stopped them from scoring, we'd have gone through. But we didn't get the goal, and we were knocked out. And at the semi-final stage, it's a really bitter pill to swallow. But I've never, ever known anything as blatant as that from all the Juventus players and the referee and the linesman. This is the biggest stitch-up you will ever see. It wasn't even subtle, you know what I mean? So don't mind if it's a bit subtle, you know, and it's a maybe, you know. This was out-and-out cheating, the match is televised. So, but you just have to get on with it. You know, nothing you can do about it.
So, I mean, Brian Clough then signed you for Nottingham Forest, so for the fourth time. So, you know, it doesn't take a mastermind to work out that he probably liked you as a player. And with Peter Taylor as well, what do you think was the magic between them and what you added to the mix?
Well, Clough was the greatest psychologist. I mean, you talk about managers, oh, he's a good coach, you know, or he's good with players, you know, I mean, everyone in football that's been a professional could coach. You know, the coaching part is just so easy. It's untrue. It's actually getting players to do things that are the correct things to do, and also putting the players in the frame of mind to go out there who want to bleed for the club, who want to bleed for the fans, you know, who want to bleed to get a result. Not just one game, but every game. And this kind of attitude, and I played with people like Dave Mackay, had this magnificent attitude, whether it was a five-a-side game of football, head tennis, whether he was playing three-card brag, whether it was a friendly match, testimonial match, you always compete 100% to beat the opposition, because that's the nature of the sport. You're paid to win matches, you know. And Clough was brilliant at talking to players, you know, and if he was getting too serious, then Peter Taylor was the joker and would come in with a joke. You know, for example, I can remember when, I'll not go back to the Derby days because it happened at Nottingham Forest, but, you know, we'd signed Stan Bowles, and, you know, Stan Bowles had played his first match, hadn't played very well, and we're having a meeting with the players, you know, and Clough is absolutely slaughtering Stan Bowles. And Stan's got his back against the dressing room wall, like looking petrified, you know, and then all of a sudden Peter Taylor comes in just to relieve the tension a little bit, you know, and he says, Brian, just a minute, Brian. He said, because, you know, he said, I stuck up for Stan. He said, just yesterday I stuck up for Stan. So Clough in midstream just had to back off a little bit, you know, and then Peter said, look, he said, my next door neighbour said Stan's not fit to live with pigs, but I said he was. And it just kind of broke the tension, because all the lads started laughing then. And obviously, Clough in this fury just, had to be stalled a little bit, because Peter Taylor's come in and just changed the atmosphere slightly, So this was the way that they worked together, but Peter Taylor would sign all the players. He brought Dave Mackay to Derby, he brought people like Peter Shilton to Nottingham Forest, Trevor Francis, Kenny Burns, so he's I suppose modern day, you'd call him the recruitment officer, but the chief recruitment officer, because there was only one, and that was Peter Taylor. And Clough was the guy that could talk to the players, the guy that convinced the players they were good players, the guy that convinced them they could go out there on that field and beat anyone on any given day and give the players the confidence. So it's all right being a coach. Oh, when this player goes here, the ball's over there. But, players don't like to hear that. Most of them know it. But the difference between coaching and going out in front of 20 or 30,000 or 50 or 100,000 is, can the players cope with that kind of pressure? And Clough only wanted players that could cope with that kind of pressure, and also cope with him giving them a rollicking 12 inches from the face and seeing how they could take that and stand up to it. because Stan Bowles, after Stan had been rescued by Peter Taylor, as we came out of the meeting, Stan's going, I'm never going to ask him anything else. I'm never going to ask him anything else again. Because he'd been slaughtered by Clough and then rescued by Peter Taylor. So it was like, Jekyll and Hyde. It was like the good guy plays bad guy. And Clough was just magnificent at speaking. I mean, people said, he used to be on the television all the time. And no wonder everybody wanted to hear him, because he always kind of hit the truth with what he was saying. He could be quite cynical, and obviously he was exceptionally confident, but he tended to back up the confidence thing by, winning matches, produced a winning side at Hartlepool that won promotion for the first time in the club's history, got Derby promoted, First Division Championship, semi-final of the Europe, Forest promotion, First Division Championship in the first season by 7 points. This was phenomenal results being produced by him, and always the entertainer. So, I worked through, I think, 14, 15 years playing for him. And I knew that by the time I was at sort of Nottingham Forest, he would be giving me the biggest rollicking in my life, because he gave me bollockings more than anybody else. I'll guarantee that. But the problem was, I could take it and then go out onto the field and try and prove him wrong. Whereas some players would crack up and they'd get nervous, but he knew he could bollock me, but it was for the benefit of somebody like 2 seats away from me. and I'm sure some of the other players knew that as well, but this is management. This is man management. And I realized that that's what he was doing later in my career, because obviously the more experience you gain, the more knowledge you have about the game itself. And, but working for Clough was always entertaining. I mean, the biggest trophy in Europe has been won by Nottingham Forest twice. If at the time you'd gone over to Europe and asked any supporters in Germany, France, Holland, which English club do you think is going to win the European Cup twice? The Nottingham Forest would never have ever got a mention in those days. So this is a remarkable thing for them to achieve, and in such a short space of time. And when you consider some of the moves to appreciate how good they were, I mean, we signed Kenny Burns from Birmingham, and he had a reputation as being a bit of a thug. He's a centre forward. He's got the old broken nose. He looks ugly, so he's going to frighten people anyway. So we signed Kenny, and people said, well, what was the reaction when you signed Kenny Burns? Because all you other lads seemed quite quiet, I said, when we were introduced to him, obviously Clough and Taylor are there, and sit down, lads, we want to introduce you to a new player. And as Kenny walks in, Ian Boyer jumped up on his seat and went, "Don't hit me, Kenny. Don't hit me, Kenny." And of course, all the other lads just collapsed laughing. And Kenny Burns is looking totally bemused. "What do you mean? I've never met you before." So it kind of broke the ice straight away. And this was the kind of sort of camaraderie, if you like, and togetherness that we had as a team. You know, it was just so close, the players together, you know, but always with the one aim that we go out there and we try and beat the opposition. But with the entertainment of Clough and Taylor, I mean, you know, this is like Abbott and Costello, you know, this is like Morecambe and Wise, but better, you know what I mean? Because it benefits you as players. So when people say, oh, Clough was really harsh, he was really strong, you know, and he must have frightened you, you know, he did in a way, but he frightened you to the point where you wanted to go out on a pitch and win a match and say, there you are, we are as good as that. So, and we had some really talented players as well at Nottingham Forest. I mean, I'm asked who the best players were, and I always go back to John Robertson. And people said, well, John Robertson, how would you describe him? And I said he's like Ryan Giggs, but with 2 good feet. You know, because Ryan Giggs only had 1 good one. That was his left one. But John Robertson had 2 good feet and was probably the greatest contributor to us winning 2 European Cups. If you wanted to take a poll amongst, you know, the players themselves, they would all agree with that. So we've got bags of ability. We're having a laugh and fun. And the other thing that I liked about Clough was you appreciated that if you've got a lot of matches, because in a lot of those seasons when we were in League Cup finals at Nottingham Forest, European Cup finals, we're playing 70 plus matches a season. Now, obviously on the pitches that we used to play on, running through a quagmire for half those matches is going to take it out of you. So on the training field, Clough used to drive the trainer, Jimmy Gordon. He used to drive him nuts, you know, because we'd go out to train, we'd do a little warm up, we'd have a 5-a-side for 10 minutes, and then Clough would go, get him in the bath. You know, and Jimmy Gordon's going, Brian, they've got to do some running. They've got to get them in the bath. They'll do it on a Saturday. They'll do it on Tuesday night. Get them in the bath. So there was a running fight between the trainer who wanted us to train and Clough, who kept coming out when we'd been training for 10 minutes and go, get them in the bath. You know, and people said to me, well, but why did you like this not training? I said, listen, we're going to play 70 games. You know what I mean? Over a 9-month spell, 70 games, you know, and it didn't matter whether it's a testimonial game, it's a friendly game, the full first team play. Because if it's a testimonial match, Clough used to say, listen, it doesn't say Nottingham Forest reserves. It says Nottingham Forest, and that's you lot, so you're playing. You know, and then we'd play in that, and then he'd give you 2 days off. And then I think his biggest triumph, though, in all honesty, because, you know, some of the methods that he used, the coaches now would, I mean, 2 days off without doing anything, 3 days off. I mean, they'd look at you now and think, you must be crazy, you know, to let them have 3 days off. But no, he used to do that. And when we qualified for the second European Cup final to play against Hamburg at the magnificent Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid, we're all thinking, oh, you know, he'll have us, we'll go somewhere for a special training camp, you know, do a proper thing, you know. But no, we went to Mallorca for a week, no training, no curfews. And if I see you training, I'll fine you. So before we played Hamburg, we're in Mallorca for a week, with no training and no curfews. And I actually cheated because I did go out for a couple of runs, because I couldn't go about 10 days before a match without doing any training. And how we beat Hamburg in that match in the Bernabeu Stadium in Madrid, I'll never know. Because, you know, nobody else in the world would have given a team a week off with no training and no curfews. And people, when you're out there, I mean, listen, it's a holiday resort, Mallorca, you know, they've got bars, they've got, you know, so what do? You can't sit drinking lemonade all day, you know what I mean? Else you'll be making strange noises out your ear end too much, you know, so you might as well have a drink while you're there. And I think it only took its toll against Hamburg in about the last 10 minutes, you know, where we were literally running on empty, but managed to hold out to a 1-0 lead from a goal scored by the genius John Robertson. So, you know, you can imagine how much pleasure the players got out of actually doing what they want to do, getting paid for it. You know, there's thousands of people every Saturday watched us play and had to pay for that privilege, whereas they paid our wages and we got paid for doing something that we'd have done for nothing. So, you know, this is how lucky footballers are. And I hope that they all appreciate it. And I'm not sure that some of them do. But we did as a side, and you know, the record will always stand there. You know, Nottingham Forest, 2 European Cups. Wow. Even Robin Hood couldn't have dreamt that one up.
And you got to lift both of them, you know, as captain on both occasions.
Yes.
What was going? I mean, what was going through your mind? You know, during the game, after the game, you know, from professional players.
Well, the build up to the game was always relaxed. I mean, I can remember when, you know, the year before, the semi-final against Cologne, the German side, where we'd drawn 3-3 at the City Ground, Nottingham, in the first leg, so that the Germans didn't even have to beat us in Cologne. We had to go and win in Germany, which in those days was asking an awful lot. But, you know, there was never any panic. You know, Clough just said, right, we said, oh, we need a goal. He said, we'll get a goal, we're good enough. So there was never any real tension in the dressing room. It's more excitement. If you believe in what you're doing, and you believe in the players, and you believe in the management, you know, you firmly go out there every match and think you can win it. And you know, being captain, for me, it was wow. I mean, I used to think this is a long way from Hartlepool. You know, if I told people this is a long way from Hartlepool, you know, but even when I go back there now, you know, I mean, I get treated with a little bit of respect, and when you start off there as a 16-year-old with nothing else in your mind but sort of trying to maybe stay in the side for 1 or 2 matches, the thrill is just incredible. And I enjoyed every single minute of it. And, you know, some of the things that happened in my career, I'm just, you know, doubly proud of. I mean, I actually played in that match in Cologne, and footballers know when they play well. And I knew that I'd played quite well that night. And then there was a quote in the German newspapers from 2 German players, one called Gunter Netzer and one from Franz Beckenbauer, who I was a massive fan of because he was a defender that could play like an inside forward. And what they both said was that, you know, who is this player McGovern? We've never heard of him, which was the normal thing that they used to put in the papers about me. They said, but he's running the match from midfield, you know, and helping Nottingham Forest keep control of the match. And, you know, that kind of tribute from a fellow professional. And I actually met Beckenbauer quite a few years later at a European Cup final. And he saw me and he said, that night in Cologne, he said, you played well. And I thought he meant the team. And I said, oh, you mean the team, Frank? He said, no, you played well that night. And it was like, you know, wow. I was so naive in those days. I didn't even get a picture taken with him, you know, and he was one of my biggest heroes, you know what I mean? Because everybody's going, nah, you're making that up. You never met Beckenbauer. But I should have got a photograph taken with him just to prove it was true.
John, sorry, John. Apparently there was a comment made by Brian Clough in the final that it's a question that's come through from Marcus. I don't know whether he can, should we say, put more light on it. But I've been told I've got to ask you about the substitute comment made by Clough in the final. Does that ring any bells?
This I believe is Bryn Gunn. Bryn Gunn was a substitute.
Right.
And we'd made a couple of substitutes already. And I think we had one choice left. And it came to the point where, you know, Clough and Taylor looked round to see who was, and Bryn Gunn, you know, and I think it was Peter Taylor, I think, said to Clough, you know, like, we'll have to put Gunny on, you know. And Peter Taylor said, oh, we've got an awful big chance there then, you know, which was a really rude remark to make. It was along those lines. I can't remember the exact words that were used, but, you know, he went, oh, we've got no chance now, which was typical Peter Taylor. You know, Clough will have talked Bryn Gunn up, and of course, Bryn went out there and did really well, you know. So it was another one of those quotes that as time passes, you know, maybe there's the odd word changes, but I know it was Peter Taylor thought it was a bad move to put Bryn Gunn out there, but
he did it well.
We accepted, you know, Bryn Gunn as easily as any of the other players that were substitutes that came on to the pitch. You've got too much time when you're out there trying to look after your own performance to worry too much about other people. You know, and if you're playing well, you can help more people. If you're not playing well, you want some of your teammates to occasionally help you out if you're having a bit of a tough time. So, but if you're playing with players that recognise these things, then obviously you can't go wrong. And I was fortunate to play with quite a few players like that.
So, in my humble opinion, you're the best Scottish player never to have played in a full international. I know you got 223 caps, but did you ever talk to any of the managers to find out why?
223 caps, yippee! Strangely enough, before the Scottish side went to Argentina in the '78 World Cup, we were playing at Old Trafford on a Saturday, and Ali McLeod, the Scottish manager, was at the match. And you know, you know that he's going to be at the match, but you don't think, oh, if I play well today, I might get picked. That never really goes through your mind. You just want to win the match. But you know, we beat Manchester United 4-0 at Old Trafford in an absolute canter. And after the match in the press room, I found this out from a photographer, believe it or not, who said to me that you know, Ali McLeod was asked which Scottish-based Forest players are going to be in your squad for Argentina. And Ali McLeod presumably said to him, all of them, they're just playing that well. They're playing out the skins. They're all going to Argentina. So this photographer tried to get an exclusive photograph done with Kenny Burns, Archie Gemmell, John Robertson and myself wearing kilts.
Exactly.
With Brian Clough. And he wanted to call the special photograph Brian Clough's Flying Scotsman. So obviously after he's heard that, you know, we're all going to be in the squad. And then when the squad was announced a couple of days later, I'm not in it. So the photographer rang me up because he'd taken photographs of us with Brian Clough. You know, he'd done the whole thing. He had to hire the kilt, so he's had to lay out money for it. And he said that the picture's useless because you're not going. He said, but Ali McLeod, he said, I can't understand it. He said, on Saturday, he said, you're all going. So he said, I'll find out and I'll ring you back. And I was just bitterly disappointed because I felt I was good enough to play for my country, like, you know, most people that play for successful clubs would think like. And I got a phone call 2 days later from this photographer. And he said, John, he said, I managed to get a hold of him. He said, and I asked him why you weren't in the Scottish squad. And he said to me, Ali McLeod, the Scottish manager, said, I didn't know he was Scottish. And I said to him, I said, the name might have been a bit of a giveaway. I said, probably because I didn't really speak Scottish, you know what I mean? Maybe I should have spoken a bit different, you know. So anyways, he said, that's what he said. He said, so anyway, that was it. So that was I never got picked for Scotland. I bitterly regret it because I'm very proud to be a Scotsman. I think you should be proud of your kind of your heritage, your youth, where you're born, the country that you were born in. I'm no different to anyone else. I really would have walked on broken glass all the way up the A1 and into Scotland to play for my country. And it really does annoy me that the Scottish manager didn't even know I was Scottish. Previously to him, Tommy Docherty was a manager. And the under-23 caps that you mentioned, I got when Tommy Docherty was the manager, and there was another issue with that actually because while Docherty was the manager, I played at Aberdeen, and Tommy Docherty played me in a wide right position, and played the wide right player, a lad called Sandy Jardine, who used to play right back for Rangers, in central midfield. And of course, the first 20 minutes of the game, 25 minutes of the game, we're not playing that well in the under-23 match. And I went over to Sandy Jardine and I said, Sandy, you go and play wide, because I'll play central midfield, because you play right back for Rangers. I play central midfield for my team, so it'll suit the side better. And actually it did, because we played a lot better. The only problem was that I got pulled off for making a tactical change, which was supposedly down to the manager to make. But I thought, well, I might get away with that one. But shortly after that, again, Tommy Docherty, as a Scottish manager, had gone to Brian Clough and said, you know, this is September time, November time, and he said to him, look, he said, Brian, Scotland are going on a close season tour of North and South America in June and July. He said, and obviously I want, you know, John O'Hare, and I want, I'm just trying to think, Derby County now, Archie Gemmell to play for, obviously go to North and South America in June and July, you know, the time when you're on holiday. And Clough just said to him, he said that they're both injured in July. And Docherty said, oh no, but it's in June and July, Brian. He said, yeah, I know, but they're injured then. They're not going there. He said that's a close season. They need to put their feet up and relax. Now the next under-23 game for Scotland was actually at Derby County when I was a player, so I never even got in the squad that time. So Clough, I think, was responsible for me having a non-appearing Scotland career, but I've got enough, you know, recollections of other matches and pleasures. But the only times Clough contacted me once when I was playing for the under-23s was when we played down in Wales, and I was at the hotel ready to go to the game, and somebody said to me, "There's a phone call for you at the reception," you know. So I'm ready to play for the under-23s, all excited, and it was Clough, you know. And I said, "Oh, hello, boss. You know, how are you?" He said, "Now listen very carefully." He said, "Don't let Willie Carr, the Coventry player, run the game. And if you get injured, I'll fucking kill you. Good luck." And that was the inspirational telephone call before I went out to play for the under-23s. If you get injured, I'll kill you. But he didn't have any sort of qualms about playing players that weren't 100% fit, because in those days we didn't have squads of 25. I mean, it was usually about 16 maximum with two goalkeepers, or 17. And if you were injured, you didn't actually make any decisions. I mean, I can remember when I was a substitute once, and I'm on the bench, and one of our players goes down injured, and the physiotherapist, once he sees a player goes down injured, jumps up, gets his magic sponge, and he's off out to treat the injured player. But not if Clough was there, because, you know, somebody had gone down injured, the physio gets up and Clough goes, "Where the hell are you going?" You know, and the physio's going, to treat the injured player, boss. "I'll tell him when he's injured. You sit down right now. And you out there, get up or get off." And that was the choice you had. You got up or you got taken off. You know, I think it was because he had to finish his career, you know, through an injury. I think this is why he was like this when he was injured. And I can remember when, you know, I'm at Derby and we're playing at West Brom in the FA Cup, 4th round. And, you know, Archie Gemmell and I had both been injured the previous week, and we hadn't trained all week due to the injuries. And on the Friday morning before the FA Cup tie at West Brom on a Saturday, you know, Clough burst into the treatment room, you know, where the physio's given us, you know, like, well, all you had was ice in those days, you know, and a heat lamp. That was all you had to get you fit again. And, you know, and Clough looked at Archie Gemmell and said, "What's wrong with you?" You know, and Archie saying, he said, it's my left ankle, boss. Went over on it against West Ham. Like, you know, it's badly swollen, and I'm only about 50% fit. And Clough said, "Yeah, but you're twice as quick as the opposition, Archie. So you've got no problem. You're playing tomorrow. Get out of my sight." You know, and then so Archie kind of hobbled out the treatment room, you know. And then he said to me, "McGovern, what's wrong with you?" I said, "Look, boss, you saw I went into a tackle with Trevor Brooking. I've overstretched." I said, the doc said I've torn a few fibres in my groin, you know, and I just can't run." "You never could run. You're playing tomorrow as well. Get out of my sight." And believe it or not, Archie and I both, I was going to say played, but, you know, actually went out on the field against West Brom. And we didn't play particularly well, to be honest with you. And Cyril Regis scored a wonder goal that knocked us out of the FA Cup. And at the end of the match, you know, Archie and I are kind of like sort of holding on to each other to hobble to the team coach to get on the coach, you know. just when we get to the steps to get on the team coach, Clough's doing an interview with the local television, you know, and the local interviewer saying, well, can you explain what happened today, Brian? You know, I'll tell you exactly what happened today. We had one player playing in midfield called Martin O'Neill. It would have been nice if someone else had joined him. You know, and Archie and I have got on the bus and we're thinking, we can hardly frigging walk. You know what I mean? One player playing in midfield, so, you know, he wasn't very sympathetic to injuries. But you got used to that as well.
So, John, just to, we've got some amazing questions coming in. Some of them you've answered already.
Yeah.
So if we could do it, if we can do this a bit like a quick fire answer. Dave Kelman's asked how difficult was it to leave Leeds. I think you've answered that one. And also we've talked about Scotland again. God, they're really rubbing it in tonight. Brian McNeil would like to know, when did you first meet Brian Laws? I don't know why he wants to know that, but...
Did I meet?
He said, when did you first meet Brian Laws? Is he a fullback at Forest? No?
Yeah, well, obviously when I was at the club, Brian Laws, I mean, Brian I've known for years and years and years, but he played after me at Nottingham Forest. You know, he never actually played in the same side that I played in.
Okay.
He came after that.
Okay.
But, you know, great lad and a great servant of the club.
Right. Alan Flukes asked about Clough as a manager and a coach, which we've gone through that. Jamie Chester, sorry, I apologise. Jane Chester says that in 1979 team was phenomenal. Who did you think was the best and most influential player?
Well, John Robertson, I think.
Yeah.
All the players will say that, you know, and I think his contribution percentage-wise was probably greater than any other player at the club.
Right.
And he never used to get injured. You know, obviously he wasn't allowed to get injured, but, you know, thankfully he actually genuinely didn't get injured, you know.
We have Nigel Vines just asking about the baseball pitch, but baseball ground pitch, we've answered that one. Malcolm Banks, why is Mr. Clough the best manager England we've never had? He leaves his mark on people. He put his shoulder over me and told me I don't like football, and told a 16-year-old I was not good enough. So I think we've gone through the psychological side there.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to me sort of extolling the virtues of Clough, you're better taking it from somebody else that's worked, you know, under Clough. And Neil Webb at Nottingham Forest and Roy Keane at Nottingham Forest both went to Manchester United and played for Sir Alex Ferguson, who everyone regards as one of the greatest managers of all time. And I personally have spoken to both of them face to face and said, who was the better manager, Clough or Ferguson? And they both have said to me, Clough by a mile.
Wow.
Not slightly better, by a mile. So that gives you an idea, not from me, from other players that have played for, you know, other great managers.
Nick Crosby's asking if there was one signing that Clough made to promote when you were promoted to the first division that helped you change into league champions, would it be either Shilton, Burns, or Gemmell? It's going to be very interesting how you answer this, because Malcolm Banks could look a little bit silly.
Well, to be fair, you know, present day, you know, Nottingham Forest, you know, sign about a dozen players a season, you know, and I said, well, they should take Clough's example by signing 3 good ones. You know what I mean?
So who would you say out of those? Who would you say out of those 3?
The best. Listen, the first season that Kenny Burns arrived and played as a centre half, he wins the Sports Writers Player of the Year.
Right.
Peter Shilton was recognised as the greatest goalkeeper.
Yeah.
Liverpool fans will say Clements, of course, you know, but Peter Shilton was phenomenal at keeping goal. You know, and there's such a small percentage of difference, and it would depend on, you know, which match you watch them in. You know, but they were both exceptionally consistent. You know what I mean? So Kenny Burns, you know, was just for him to turn into a centre half, and he had the skill of a centre forward. You see, so probably that first season, you know, you've got to say Kenny Burns, but you know, John Robertson still would creep into the equation again anyway.
So three real stars.
Yeah. Listen, you know, I always look at the players, you know, and how much have they contributed, you know, and Peter Shilton has always, in my eyes, been the best goalkeeper I've ever seen. And he did have one technique that I didn't see many other keepers have. And if you think about it, and it was on one-on-one situations where a striker gets through. And if you watch goalkeepers, when a striker gets through, they tend to stand with the legs apart. But if the striker, who's got clean through against him, goes to shoot, dummies, and then jinks one way or the other, if his legs are apart, he's got to pull one leg close to the other one before he can push off to get near the ball. And you can do it yourself. You stand with your legs apart, and then you've got to go right or left. Well, first of all, you've got to bring your other leg up close to the one, you know, before you go. And Peter Shilton always kept his feet together. So if somebody jinked past him one way, he'd immediately just spring and grab the ball. You know, and he was the best in the business at that one aspect of goalkeeping. Obviously, Ray Clemens was good at other aspects of goalkeeping.
Well, Malcolm Banks thinks it was Shilton. Ron Murray, again, he's rubbing in about not winning a full international cup. He said he was shocked that you weren't. I think everybody is. Malcolm's also, talking about Burns winning Player of the Year. And, now, this is a good one from Rob Marrow. Having played for Derby and Forest, can you appreciate Leicester City's relative success of late?
Yes, of course. I mean, you know, you welcome any team's success and the formula that brings it, you know. And I mean, they signed somebody called Vardy that, you know, probably a lot of other clubs might not have gone for, you know. But Jamie Vardy, who played for non-league, like, you know, started right at the bottom and worked his way right to the very top. So, you know, he was an inspirational signing that cost them very little money to start with. And you tend to favour those because, you know, he's cost next to nothing, but he's produced so much for the club. You know, and I'm delighted at Leicester, you know, because they seem to do the business in a business-like way. You know, there's never ever much controversy written about Leicester City, you know, and they've just quietly become a real force in English football that can compete with the top clubs like, you know, the Uniteds and the Cities and the Liverpools. So, you know, as a club, they've done magnificently.
Jeff Milnes is asking a question. I mean, I'm just saying, also as well as that, Rob Marrow apparently sat between yourself on one side and Roy McFarland on the other in a local side called San Severo when playing for Derby in Mallorca as a 9-year-old. So he remembers you from them. So
yeah. Well, that was our normal haunt for the end of season. You know, Clough would just take us there for a week at the end of the season. There were never any football matches involved.
I don't know whether Jeff took a photo that day or not, but I think it'd be similar to the Beckenbauer story you have there.
After you've had a week in Mallorca at the end of the season, you know, people said, well, what was it like? You know, and I said, I can't remember really much about it.
I've got a great question from Jeff Milnes. It says, could you ask John if he agreed with Brian Clough that, I'm not going to do a Brian Clough impersonation, our goalie, Peter Shilton, was worth at least a gold start every match? And was it you who went to the cinema and Cloughie was sat behind you?
Oh yes, no, definitely. That was I was playing for Derby County at the time, and the normal rules of players is that, you know, you can go out for a drink, but not 2 days before a game. You know, you don't go out 2 days before a game to try and, you know, some form of discipline. And I remember when Clough called me into his office on one Friday before a game, he said, did you go out last night? You know, and I said, no, boss. And then he went, now I'm going to ask you again and be very careful what you say. And I went, oh, I said, no, I went to the pictures, boss. I went to I think it was the Superama, it was called Superama. I went to the pictures. And he said, yeah, I know you did. He said, I was sat 3 seats behind you. So he was actually sat behind me at the pictures. And I can remember what the film was. It was 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was a great movie. And I actually bought the album and the music to it because it was fantastic. But yeah. So I went to the cinema, but I didn't consider that. You know, I mean, actually, I went to the pub with my good lady after I'd been to the cinema, but you know, I didn't tell him that one. No point in talking yourself into trouble, really, is there? Yeah.
I'm going to skip over a few questions because they have been asked or answered already. But what are your views on the Super League idea? Would you have liked to have played in it?
Well, listen, you know, the European Cup's the Super League. You know, and one or two of these teams that wanted to join the Super League haven't even won the biggest trophy in Europe anyway, which would deny them, through their lack of credentials, to get involved. I mean, Arsenal want to join the Super League, but they've never won the European Cup. You know, wait a minute. How can you do that? You know, the players and clubs are complaining about, you know, there's too much travel. There are too many matches. You know what I mean? And the squads of 25 can't cope with it, you know, which is a joke, really. You know what I mean? So I just think the Super League was just another way of trying to, you know, make money and extort more money from the fans who have got, like, you know, the Champions League, they call it now. They shouldn't call it the Champions League. They should call it the European Cup. It was the Champions League when I used to play, because you had to be champions of your country to get in the competition. So they've misnamed that. They've got the Champions League, they've got the UEFA League, you know, we've still got the League Cup, we've got the FA, you know, there's enough matches. There's enough matches. If you want to change the format of them and squeeze another couple of teams in, do that. But, you know, to break away and form, you know, an elite Super League, there already is an elite competition, and it's called the Champions League. You know, so I just think it was a ridiculous scheme, and I don't think they did much homework on it. Which, with the aftermath of what's happened, I think I might be right in that respect.
Well, John, I'd just like to say thank you. And also just to acknowledge that today, 76 years ago, 41 Club actually started. So it's the 76th anniversary.
All right.
It's fantastic association tonight. And you know what? I can't think of a better speaker that we could have had to celebrate this with us tonight. So thank you very much, John. I'm now going to pass over. Is it Roger doing the vote of thanks tonight?
It is, yes.
Roger, would you like to give the vote of thanks to John, please?
Certainly would. John, I'd like to echo Jim's comment. That was a great talk, a great discussion, a great insight into football and your progress through it, from Hartlepool to Derby to Leeds to Notts Forest. Heavily sprinkled with Brian Clough anecdotes, and a great insight into the great Cloughie, and bring us right up to date with your views on the Super League, which was great to see. And I think what shone through was your enthusiasm for the game, and your appreciation of others, appreciation of yourself, particularly Franz Beckenbauer. It was great to see your delight in that. I apologise you weren't Scottish enough for Scotland.
Me too. I actually like haggis now as well, you know.
Well, there you go. Could have eaten more of it as a youth. You might have got it. But it was a great night. I mean, I'm not the greatest follower of football. I thought, you know, didn't know what I was going to expect. Thought it might be a bit sort of, you know, small boys in the park, jumpers for goalposts, all that sort of thing. It was really great, and I wouldn't say you're the best speaker we've ever had, but you're certainly in the top one.
Well, thank you very much for that. Yeah.
Gents, so as usual, gents, if you'd like to unmute yourselves and express your appreciation in the usual way, I'd be very grateful. John, thanks.
Thanks very much.
John. Brilliant. Brilliant.
Well done, John.